US President again said that he was considering withdrawing the United States from NATO. And of course, this is not the first time that Donald Trump has lashed out at the alliance. But the refusal of NATO member countries to assist with the war in Iran has further angered him.
So, is a US exit from NATO likely, and what would that mean for the future of the alliance? Tressa Ganelov is a Director for Programs and Operations and a Senior Fellow at the Scowcroft Centre for Strategy and Security at the Atlantic Council. I spoke to her earlier, and she says a withdrawal of the United States from the NATO alliance would have far-reaching ramifications.
President Trump has threatened the alliance before in several instances, and quite frankly, his dislike of the alliance, his skepticism about the alliance goes way back, not just to this presidency, this term, but to 2017 and even before that. Sometimes he does try to escalate and get people's attention to respond to changes that he wants, to exact actions, but it's unclear this time if that's what he's doing with the NATO case, and he is really upset, I think, at NATO right now. But from NATO's perspective, it's a complicated road, right? Just in January, the president was threatening to invade Greenland, which is part of Denmark, which is a NATO country. He then, looked to do tariffs against the EU. And so the NATO countries that are involved this time were not informed about the Iran strikes. And so they found themselves in a difficult position, and the president is upset about it.
And the US president seems to be upset that there hasn't been this sort of automatic collective defence from NATO countries in response to this. Is that part of the agreement?
Well, there is no obligation to respond to this particular case. But as you know, the NATO collective defense mechanism, the Article 5, has only been used once, and that was after 9/11. And that led to NATO countries supporting the U.S. efforts in Afghanistan, to many hundreds of casualties of NATO troops and long-term support there, and then also support in Iraq, where many NATO troops were also lost and injured. And that actual NATO mission in Iraq just was suspended in March. So there have been the long-term sort of support to the U.S. From NATO in various contexts. And then there's also ongoing work on a daily basis protecting the Arctic, protecting NATO's southern flank, and general support for security in Europe and across the northern Atlantic. So those are kind of the main things that they have focused on. They're under no obligation this time.
The US president hasn't pulled the trigger yet. He hasn't withdrawn the US at this stage. But this anti-NATO rhetoric, how destabilising is that for the alliance? What are the implications of just the rhetoric around this?
The rhetoric, of course, is destabilizing. An alliance is really only good as its members are committed, right? Trust is the foundation of that. The NATO alliance has continued on in many ways, despite some of the headlines and the distrust that goes on, and President Trump's latest ire towards the alliance. There's a lot of work that gets done on a daily basis that doesn't get noticed. It doesn't seem that he sees that very much. But just in response to the Hague summit last year, the alliance began to work towards spending to 5%, which is what President Trump asked. So he exacted some positive change into the alliance. But right now, the way things stand, it is extremely tense. And the United States is a foundational, necessary member of the alliance. It is the core member. It definitely does contribute the most resources, and President Trump was trying to change that, and I think positive change was underway. But right now, these kinds of threats and these kinds of concerns put the alliance into question, and it affects the deterrence that they'd like to see, particularly vis-a-vis Russia.
Well, given, as you say, how important the US role in NATO is, what would it mean if the US did withdraw from the alliance?
Certainly there'd be, so withdrawal is a an interesting question in itself, and I can speak to that. But if the United States sort of quit participating in the alliance, for instance, there'd be a financial implication. The United States gives about $750 million to kind of core functions for the alliance every year, and about $4 billion to the European defense effort, European Defense Initiative. So there would be a financial cost. It would affect training. It would affect daily collaboration. It would affect intelligence cooperation, or it could. It could affect longer-term deterrence, credibility vis-a-vis Russia. And so the implications would be far-reaching. There are also numerous U.S. troops stationed in Europe, and what would happen to them is unclear. The United States has bases and collaborative locations in Spain, Italy, France, Germany, Romania, and has collaborative work with countries such as France, the UK, a number of other locations throughout the region, throughout the NATO alliance. And so those will have real effects on U.S. operational abilities too. I think the president is finding that he does need allies under stress and in this campaign against Iran, but they have been refusing in some cases, and it shows the need to have those collaborative efforts and the importance of an alliance that works.